So we're going to talk about mercantilism. Mercantilism is an economic system much like capitalism or communism, and it really gained foothold and was really put in practice through the 16 and 17 and into the 1800s as well, in these European empires that were spreading throughout the world. One of the famous guys with it is Jean-Baptiste Colbert, that we'll see a quote from in a second, and he was like a finance minister for Louis the 14th that we talked about in absolutism. So this is about mercantilism. Some of the tenets of mercantilism is that wealth is limited. There is only so much money in the world. It cannot be more of it cannot be created. And the more wealth you have, the more power you have. And so dividing up the power pie in a lot of ways is dividing up the wealth pie. So because it's limited, the pie is always one size. And if England got bigger, other countries were losing power and wealth. If England got smaller, their piece of the pie got smaller, they lost power and wealth. And so this was the basic idea of mercantilism. There is a limited amount of wealth in the world, and we need to get as much of it as possible. And this is how the Europeans kind of put this into practice. So they wanted to accrue as much gold and silver in their mother country's treasury. So mother country tells you they're going to build colonies. And so there was a variant of this which wasn't really practiced as much as it was talked about, which is called bullionism. The actual gold and silver bars are called bullion. And so they wanted to save or accrue or gain as much bullion in their home country as possible. But it's really hard to do that. So what they wound up focusing on is a favorable balance of trade, that they would have a lot more goods leaving the country and fewer imports coming into the country. And a way to really do that is to set up colonies around the world. So England, France, if you look at maps from the, let's say, 1700s, you'll see that there are colonies all over the world. And those colonies would provide a variety of raw materials. So on here, gold, silver, fur, lumber, foodstuffs were provided from the colonies. They went to the mother country, and the mother country was the economic engine, the factory that churned all this out. And in the case of France, an example was France went and colonized North America. They set up fur trading forts all over America and Canada. They got those furs and they brought them back, and they manufactured them into, a lot of them went into hats and other pieces of clothing. England did this with cotton and tobacco, and so it would come to the mother country. They put their people to work in England or in France manufacturing these goods, and then they would ship those back to the colonies. It provided a ready market, and so there were more things leaving the mother country of higher value than there were things that were coming in. As I talked about, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, he wrote to King Louis the 14th in 1669. He says the state is flourishing not only in itself, I mean the state is growing, but also by the want which is inflicting upon all the neighboring countries. And so you can imagine, think about the world as a big table, and it's laid out with food, and all the food that is available to eat is on the table. And Louis the 14th and France are shoving other countries out of the way and eating up food off of their plate, so that they are consuming more and more of the goods and services and wealth of the world. And these other countries are then having to go without. They are in want. And so they're winning this war. Sometimes they're winning it through the military, and sometimes they're winning it through taking away resources from other countries. Let's talk about how this really looks. So countries need a strong military for protection and expansion, and so that's part of absolutism. They'd build a strong military and they'd go out and fight and expand. And so that meant that the country that was doing this, needed to finance this type of military and the wars of expansion. So we need gold to have this great military. So let's will go out and we'll do trading. So ships are sent out, colonies are set up. These, we've talked about trading posts and fortifications are built, often on the coast or at the mouth of rivers around the Indian Ocean, Malacca, all over Asia, in and through Central and South America. And so we'll set up these things, and the main goal of them is, at least in most places, is to find resources or people to exploit. So we'll use these resources and people, and we'll take as much as we can from them. They load those up onto the ships, and that surplus trade is brought back. Let's bring back as many of those raw materials, those goods, as we can. And then we'll use that to finance our military, and we will then go out and we'll protect the forts that we built, and we'll use those as bases to expand and get further inland and pull in more resources. So the result of this is that countries, and in this we're thinking now we're getting empires because we're building colonies around the world, needed continual expansion in order to maintain a favorable trade balance. So it was a period of a lot of wars. And then combine that with the idea that trade was also a war. You're stealing and making the other countries have less. The result was this era of expansion and then control. They wanted to control the trade, control who was trading with who and how they were trading. This stems from that idea of a limited wealth theory. There's only so much food on the table. And so I often like to use a pie to talk about this. So this is the piece of the pie. Let's call this 18%. So in 18%, England has this much, and the rest of the world has 82% of the total wealth. Well, in order for England or whatever country to get more wealth, they needed to get a bigger piece of the pie. So in this second example, they've expanded, they've gone to war, they've cut into other people's trades, and they get a new bigger piece of the pie. Please note, everybody else's piece got smaller because now they own 50%, so there's only 50% left for the rest of the world to own. That is that limited wealth theory that mercantilism was operating off of. But with the idea of international free trade, when we look at the piece of the pie, we say, oh, okay, so here's my piece of the pie. I have 18% of the pie. But what if the pie gets bigger, right? So here's a giant pie, and okay, our slice of the pie has actually shrunk. So it's smaller. Let's say it's 6% of this pie. But in the first pie, there's, $1 billion of trade. In the second pie, there's $10 billion in trade. So 6% of 10 billion is worth way more than 18% of 1 billion. So the pie gets bigger, and even though you're less dominant, you are reaping the benefits. And so most arguments today would say that we want to have a win-win situation in trade. You get something, I get something, and we both win. In the old limited wealth way, it was win-lose. Somebody was losing influence and losing money no matter what happened. There are more nuances in this international free trade. Not everybody's winning all the time. But generally what we're seeing in the world in modern times is people want trade flowing throughout the world in order to increase the amount of goods that they're sending out and increase the amount of goods their people are able to buy. All right, that is mercantilism as practiced by the European empires, let's say starting in the 1500s through kind of the mid to late 1800s.